you are.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Rome Sessions. Jason Griffin here. It's been a while. Happy to be back on air. And I'm joined today by a man who hardly needs an intro in the Rome community, David Vargas. David joined us. Sorry, guys. Give me just 1 second. I'm having some... There we go. So David left his job. Quick introduction. David left his job back in August of 2020 to start work on open source projects full time. His goal from the outset has been to build a portfolio of web applications, all open source, that could sustain him financially indefinitely, so he doesn't have to be employed again. He can work for himself. Rome.js has been really the first to catch momentum, and he's currently focused on developing a sustainable business model around Rome.js while also starting up some additional projects. So David, welcome to the session. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. It's I think this is my second time here, so happy to be on, and excited to
happy to have you back.
To dive in.
Cool. Well, let's start out just in case we have folks on the call who aren't as familiar with you or your work in the Rome community. You know, I gave a quick little introduction there, but talk a little bit about more about Rome.js and some of the work that you've already done in the Rome community and what your goals are with respect to overall kind of driving a improvement into the Rome ecosystem, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. So I came across Rome, I think the end of 2019. And it wasn't until I took like Net License course that I really understood how useful or how it can help me. And immediately the first thing I wanted to do once this is a useful tool was starting to connect it with all my other things that I had, like my GitHub or Google Calendar or whatever. And then in June, July, there was a member of the Rome community. He went by Rome Hacker. He goes by TFT Hacker now. He came out with Rome 42, and I was like, holy crap! You can make actual extensions and mini applications on top of this product. That's incredible. And so that led to making one extension, which led to a second extension, which led to I need a place to put them all. So that led to Rome.js. So the tagline I like to use is Rome.js empowers users to get the most out of their Rome graphs. And yeah, Rome is a blank canvas, and it should be our portal into thinking about our day or what we're tackling and what our thoughts and all that. And because it's a blank canvas, it means we can build a lot of stuff on top of it to help you actually use that data.
Yeah, it definitely is a blank canvas. And talk a little bit about some of the more popular extensions that you've already built before we get into the multiplayer and the new cross graph capabilities that you've put out. What are some of the most popular things you've already got out there?
Yeah, so the most popular one is actually one I inherited from Rome Hacker, which is Smart Blocks. It has probably 4 times the amount of downloads than all the other extensions. And it basically allows you to, as a user, create templates that can output into your own graph. But these templates are also smart in the sense that there are special commands that can unroll into the current date, or even make API calls, or get data from other sources, or query your graph and return to-dos and stuff like that. And so it really allows users to define custom workflows in their graph.
Yeah,
so that's probably the most popular one that I've inherited. Most popular one that I built from scratch, it has to be probably either Google Calendar or the website generation. One of those.
Got it. Yeah. And that one allows you to, that last one you mentioned there allows you to convert your Rome graph into basically a static site. So if you want to publish a digital garden, for example, you're able to do that through that extension, correct?
Yeah. And that's one of the premium extensions. So most of the Rome.js library is free, but there are a handful of them that are premium. And yeah, so with the website, with the static site extension, you can define which sub parts of your graph you want to turn into a website, and then just click a button and it'll deploy it to your domain.
Very cool. Let's get down to business. You've got this new multiplayer extension out, which I was super excited to see some progress being made on it. And I don't want to steal your thunder too much here. I'll let you kind of introduce it really what it's all about. But ultimately, I will start by saying that I was very excited because I think this idea of being able to collaborate across multiple different graphs is really one of the big areas that Roam needs to figure out, that to really get to that next level of usage. And so I know you've kind of just gotten underway with this, and you've told me, and I think publicly stated, like this is just the beginning and you've got more plans. But give us the 30,000 foot view right now. What is multiplayer all about?
Yeah, so multiplayer is just like you said, it's all about connecting different Roam graphs to each other and being able to send blocks, pages, references from one graph to the other. I'm in like God knows how many graphs do like all the people I've worked with, and ideally I would like to stay in my graph and then just like send blocks or send pages to the other graphs. That's like my ideal workflow. Obviously, that's not possible with native Roam today. I have to like switch graphs and like be able to navigate in that way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so multiplayer basically allows you to connect multiple graphs to each other so that you can then exchange data in a more direct way between the two of them. That's hopefully less bug free than just like the straight copy and paste.
Right. Yeah. And I know that was, that's always been one of the concerns. I, like you, have been a part of multiple different collaborations and Roam graphs. And it's always kind of a concern of like, writing is hard work. And sometimes you're in Roam and you're producing writing that you feel like is really good, but maybe you're in a graph that you don't own, or maybe you're in one of your secondary graphs that's not really your primary one. And so there's always this kind of nagging thought, at least in the back of my mind, of like, I really wish I could just sort of live in my one graph and have more ability to send things out to different ones as I see fit, but so that I can keep all of that valuable writing and all of those thoughts that I'm creating in one more standardized place. So I think it's, again, great that we're making some progress on this, and would love to jump in and start doing some screen shares to give people a more concrete understanding of what this is, and maybe starting with the initial setup. If you can talk about that. And then once we go through that, we'll kind of close out today's conversation with some of the backstory. And I'd love to hear about some of the challenges and that you encountered developing this, and maybe some of the future plans to the extent that you can share any of those. But let's start out at the beginning from the user's perspective. If they're interested in setting this up, what is the way that they go about that?
Yeah, for sure. So all extensions on Roam.js are on roamjs.com, and all of them also have this like copy extension button. And the point of this is so that it could be a one-click copy, and then you come to your graph and you paste it, and your extension's right there. And then you click the yes, I know what I'm doing. Okay, again, if you're not comfortable with other people's code, don't do it. But
this is let's actually pause here, because this is like a big scary message especially for non-technical users, or I certainly don't consider myself like a non-technical user, but I'm on the lower end of the spectrum, and I don't understand the code, for example. Like I can't really look at code and tell what it's doing. So I'd love for you to share your perspective as a developer about how lesser technical users should think about this big scary warning that we see when we install Roam extensions.
Yeah. So think about installing a Roam extension as the same thing as saying, Vargas, you now have access to all the data in my graph and can do whatever you want with it. That's how much power you are giving the author of whatever extension to do what they will in your graph. An extension could hypothetically gather all of your data and like ship it off to somewhere else. It could delete all your data. It can do a lot of gnarly things. But because of this risk, all the code from Roam.js is open source. It's all completely open. It's all public. So either you or someone you trust can go and vet it and like ensure like, yeah, this is doing what it claims it's doing.
Got it.
The code that you paste in here, it's like pretty simple. All it does is it basically like tells Roam, it adds like this link to Roam that says like every time you load, install this script, install this extension.
Yep.
So a lot of users, when they're running into issues, they do something like they delete this and then paste it again. That does nothing. That will not like fix the issue you're doing, because every time Roam loads, it's installing all the extensions on your graph.
Got it.
Like basically doing
That's good to know.
It's basically doing a fresh install on every load. So reinstalling is the same thing or refreshing is the same thing as reinstalling.
Got it. Okay, cool. We can keep moving, but I think the key takeaway there is just know make sure you trust the author. established, like Rome.js, very well established in the Rome community at this point. I think be careful about just willy-nilly kind of running around and installing extensions. But generally, if you trust the author, you're good to just click, yes, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Know the code, know the person who knows the code.
Yeah.
One of those are your two options.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah. So multiplayer. So in multiplayer, there are two modes. There's a synchronous mode and an asynchronous mode. And these two modes map to the free version. So synchronous mode is free and asynchronous mode is the premium version. And I'll go more into depth on the difference between those two in a bit. So if you're on synchronous mode, what you want to do is one graph is going to play the role of the host, and one graph is going to play the role of like connecting to it. Similar to like how we just got into this call, you, Jason, were the host, and I had to connect to you in order for us to like now exchange messages like this. To start it up, the host will go to set up multiplayer, and this dialog will open up, and then you click this copy button, and this basically copies a like handshake code that the other graph needs to know where in the world that first graph is. The second graph, the one that connects, will hit connect to graph, and you paste in the code that you copied from the first graph. And when you hit connect, you'll get a new code that you then paste in the original, and you hit connect, and now the two are connected to each other.
Yep. You got to make sure you do that both ways. I know when I originally set this up, that was kind of like I had to make sure I understood that you're pasting the code in the first graph that you're connecting, and then that's going to automatically copy a new code to your clipboard, and then you got to go back to the originating graph and paste that one in there. And then once you do that, they link right up.
Yeah, exactly. And again, what you're doing with that exchange is basically the two graphs are figuring out like almost exchanging addresses, like where in the world are you, so that we can now talk to each other instead of having to talk to a third-party server. There are three messages that are supported right now. There's a send page, a copy block, and cross-reference.
And messages is just the kind of name, the general name that you've given as a sort of a container. Messages are the container, so to speak, through which you can send various pieces of information from one graph to another. So again, in this initial implementation, you've got three different types of messages, but I know, and we'll come back to this later, like there's opportunities to expand and have additional types of messages in the future.
There's opportunities to have hundreds. Our limitation is only our imagination.
Got it.
Yeah. So like you said, these are the three types of messages. Cross-reference is only available in async mode. The first two are available in sync mode. So let's say I have a block and I want to send that across to the second block. I just open the command palette and type copy block to graph. I specify which page in the other graph I want it to appear. I pick the graph I want to send to. I hit send, and then it appears on the bottom of the page there. And then there's a little like notification that it successfully got sent.
Very cool. And as far as, again, this is the synchronous mode. So in this mode, this is the free version because there's no reliance on any back-end infrastructure to be up and running in order to facilitate the exchange of these messages. On the flip side, with synchronous mode, as the name implies, both graphs have to be online in order for it to work. Correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that distinction that you just made is the core distinction of like what in general makes a free versus a premium Rome.js extension. If something requires Rome.js to store data, it's considered a premium extension. If something does not require Rome.js to store data, then it can be free. So because this synchronous connection doesn't require like Rome.js doesn't even need to exist for this to happen. Like once you have the code, you can just do it. It's just free because it's all out there now.
Got it. And so use cases for this synchronous mode might be, I can imagine a use case where maybe I own a couple of graphs and I want to send a block or a page from one to the other, or maybe I'm working in my own graph, but I'm working in maybe a live study group or something like that. We've got a shared graph that we want to be doing some shared writing in, for example, and we could be sending messages into that graph while we're maybe in a co-working session or something like that. Those might be some use cases I can think of. Any others that you might illuminate there?
Yeah, it's either like two researchers or like both online at the same time, and they want to be able to send data, or two of my own graphs. Like,
Yep.
and I want the data to be preserved. One interesting thing that I'll note between these first two commands is terminology between send and copy. So a copy means I'm just taking the text and throwing it onto the other graph. Send page means all of the IDs will be preserved, which means like block references that I made on the first graph can also appear, like as long as it's with each other, will appear on the second graph with a send page. Because again, I like references are preserved in send pages, but not in a copy. And
got it. Talk to me a little more about that. So if I've got a page with let's say a block reference on the page, and then I send that page over to the other graph, it actually preserves a reference back to the original graph.
No, not
Is that
back.
what you're saying?
Not back to the original, like within each other. So
Okay.
if I have this demo page with references, and I have the first thing, and then I want to reference this. These IDs will like be preserved when I send it. So if I hit send page to graph and I hit Rome.js, so we just got a demo page with references, and the internal reference got preserved between the two because all the IDs are preserved.
Got it. Okay, so in this case, the block reference on the second block there is referencing a block that's on the same page.
Yeah, and so if I if I send two pages, right? Because if you look at the URL, it's the same ID between the two graphs. So like all IDs are preserved. So if I send two pages and they reference each other, then those references will be preserved when I send it over.
Okay, very cool.
Cool.
So we've talked about copy block, and we've talked about send page, and I think that's again, those today are the two different types of messages that are available in the synchronous mode. Anything else you feel like we should touch on in the synchronous mode, or do you feel like we should shift gears and talk about asynchronous?
I think we are ready to talk about asynchronous. So asynchronous mode again requires a Rome.js subscription. When you go, one thing to note, if you haven't subscribed to any Rome.js extensions thus far, one thing you'll need is a Rome.js token. And that token is basically our way of knowing, okay, like this person on this graph maps to like this user in Rome.js. And you need to have the same email. The same email that you use in your graph needs to be the email that you sign up with Rome.js. Otherwise, impersonation is possible.
Right.
So on the user page on the extensions tab, you can just hit here and hit copy. And then any premium extension will have the ability to do a set Rome.js token where you can just copy, where you can just paste it in here and hit save. And then you'll have you'll be connected. We'll know that this is you. And then for multiplayer specifically, all Rome.js extensions have a like config page on Rome/js/ whatever the name of the extension is.
Got it.
And then there's an asynchronous page, which will first check that you're subscribed to the extension and then give you access to the other features.
Gotcha. So again, just to recap that, if you're interested in what we're about to explore with the asynchronous functionality, and you don't already have a Rome.js, I guess you would call it a premium account, would that be an accurate way to describe it, or just a token?
Yeah. So if you haven't already subscribed to like a different extension in the past.
Got
Like
it.
if you already subscribe to like the website one, for example, then you don't have to, like, your token's already in Roam, so that same token could be used across all the extensions.
Gotcha. And you do that by going to roamjs.com and essentially just creating an account. And that's where you're going to enter your payment information.
Right. There's
Gotcha.
also a way if you're also able to enter it through Roam as well, depending on which path you go. But yeah,
okay, gotcha. So a couple of different ways you can do that. But at a high level, you need to create that account and get that token if you want access to the asynchronous mode.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, okay, so async mode, it allows the high level is that it allows you to do what we just did without the requirement of the other graph being online. So if I were to let me do a refresh since it's been a while.
And while you're refreshing here, talk to me a little bit about the pricing model for the asynchronous. How does that work?
Yeah, so it's on a pay per use model, and extensions going forward are going to be more pay per use. And what a use counts as is the amount of time that you are connected to Roam.js multiplayer. So you saw that message that came up. It's like successfully connected to Roam.js multiplayer. So that's one use. The amount of minutes, like each minute, like maps to one use. Every message that you send to another graph that needs to go through Roam.js, that's a use. And then reserving what's called networks is 100 uses, so $1. And then the model is 100 use per dollar.
Got it. So a dollar gets you 100 uses. Now your graph is going to presumably, if you've got this set up, is the graph going to automatically connect to multiplayer, and then is the meter sort of running that whole time, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the meter runs as soon as you connect to it. There's an option here to disable auto connect if you don't want to like auto connection to happen, as well as there's a disconnect command to like manually do it. Also, if you just like leave Roam, it'll disconnect. Also, if you don't if it detects like 10 minutes of inactivity, it'll also disconnect.
Got it. So it's got an inactivity timer as well. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm still playing around with the pay-per-use model, and I'm not sold on like the final amount. So I'm also like open to decreasing it over time. Like it's harder to raise prices, so it's a little bit more dauntingly expensive for now. But I'm open to decreasing it over time, depending on like as I monitor like how people are actually using it.
Yeah, I think you got to get it out there and kind of get a feel for how people are actually using it, get some feedback. That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the core idea with the async mode is this concept called networks. So you can create and join networks with the async mode, and a network basically says like when you send messages, any graph that's in your network is a viable candidate to be sent the message. And so my Roam synthesis graph here is in like a demo dev network. And if I like go back to the Synchronous tab, I'll see that this graph called Roam Depot Developers is in that network, but it's disconnected. It's offline because on the right, I'm still on roamjs.com. When I go to Roam, to the Roam Depot Developers graph on the right, instead of having to do that handshake code swap that we did in the beginning, the two graphs should auto connect, and then we'll be ready for peer-to-peer messaging.
Got it. So, okay, because in this case, the graphs are, again, connecting to that backend infrastructure. Yeah. So there's not a need to do this peer-to-peer, browser-to-browser, I should say, handshake. You've got infrastructure on the back end. And again, that's what's driving that premium pricing model, is the need to support that. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And so as you saw, these two messages came up on either end. And so that they connected automatically because they know, because you created the network, Roam.js knows, all right, these two graphs are in the same network. Let's connect them when they come online.
So contextualize this idea of a network a little bit more for me. Give me like an example. A network could be, for example, me and 4 or 5 friends want to all put our graphs into a network and just all have the ability to send. I could send a message to any one of those four
Yeah.
friends graphs at any time. Is that essentially what we're talking about here?
Yeah. Think about like a research lab where you have like the head, the head lab person. Is that what you call them? You have
It
the
is
like
now.
the head lab person, and then there's a bunch of other people working under them, and they all have their own roam graphs, and you can like create a network to host or to connect all those graphs so that you can be able to send messages to any of them.
Got it.
So what happens when the graph comes online, right? We did that handshake. It does the handshake automatically, and now they're connected peer-to-peer. So any messages I send right now, those are free because it just sends it directly.
Oh, gotcha. Because so it's going to use that browser to browser when it can.
When it can, and so you get so you save money on that. But let's say Roam Depot developers disconnects, you get a little message as the other graph saying, oh, Roam Depot developers disconnected. But I want them to have this block. So if I do copy block to graph, and I also send this to March 10th, 2022, and I want to send this to Roam Depot developers. So I've sent that message. That message because Roam Depot developers is not online, that gets stored on Roam.js, and now that's a premium message. So that counts as one of your uses.
Got it.
When the next time Roam Depot developers comes online, it basically like contacts Roam.js for like any it's almost like an email inbox. Like, what are all the messages I missed? And when it loads, it'll replay.
It's going to pull those messages.
Yeah, and so I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, on the bottom right, there was like a little loading 0 of 1 messages, and it brings that up and then plays them all out into the graph.
Gotcha. So I've got a couple of is this possible types of questions.
Anything is possible.
Yeah. So that's right. It's all code. Number one, the idea of a network of graphs, as you were laying that out and using the research lab example, one thing I thought about was, in a team environment, is there any plans, or have you thought about what it might take to allow one person to kind of be like the master, so that one credit card, like one person could go create the Roam.js account, get the token. So you could have like a company credit card where all of the uses are basically getting metered against one master account, so to speak. And then the rest are almost like sub accounts. I can see that potentially being useful in like a business or team environment.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea that I hadn't considered. But the way that'd be possible right now is that master account would have to give everyone their Roam.js token, which is a little bit scary, or it should be frowned upon.
Yeah, so there's some concerns there. Got it.
So doing a sub account method seems possible. It's just it's not live right now.
Got
but
it.
That's something that can be possible.
The other question I had was, when you do like a copy block or even send page, for example, that the modal that pops up there where I noticed you're typing in the full name of the page, is there any plans, or would it be possible in the future to have that field auto populate? And
So actually, so let's do, I'm going to answer your question by first demonstrating cross-reference. And it's going to be a similar work. So that's something, what you just mentioned is something that's probably only going to be available in async mode, and I can explain why.
Right.
So when I click on this block, if I do copy cross graph block reference, I can come to the other graph and paste it. Notice how the format's a little different. It says the graph name it comes from, colon, and then the block reference, as opposed to just a regular block reference. Then it does like a loading, and then it shows the block reference.
Yep.
So what's happening here? What's happening is that this graph needs to talk to Roam.js for the block reference. And the reason why it needs to talk to Roam.js is because if this graph goes offline, this won't know what the reference is. So Roam.js stores what that cross reference was, so that you don't, so that Rome depot developers doesn't need Rome synthesis to come online for this reference to ever be like to ever render correctly. The autocomplete pages that you mentioned would work in a similar way. Those page options could be stored for like in Rome.js, so that when the graph is like trying to like auto-populate choices, it doesn't require the other graph to be online in order to have the full breadth of choices.
Right.
And
very cool.
And a lot of all of this, everything that I'm saying would be so much easier if and when Rome releases a backend API, because then Rome.js doesn't need to store any of this. It could just be a direct query on the other graphs.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball for me. What's your prognostication about if and when that backend API will come from Rome? Do you have any guesses?
So a year ago, Notion released their API, their backend API. When I found out how long it took them, they said, or I heard from friends that they've been talking about it for 3 years.
Yeah,
that
it was a long time. We use Notion extensively at work, so I know it was a long time in the making.
From that moment on, I've started building with the mentality of like, do not wait for Rome. So I basically build extensions, not waiting for them, and B, not caring if they release something that like makes something I do obsolete, because I cannot wait for them to like come out with a thing. And then if they do build something that makes one of my extensions obsolete, then great. I don't have to, it's less code for me to maintain.
Yeah.
And so, wrapping back around for the API, like, yeah, an API would be great, but, people still want multiplayer. So we're gonna figure out a way to implement it with that design constraint. And then, if and when it comes, it'll be, the extension will get that much better.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of that idea of obsolescence possibly in the future, I think I saw a tweet of yours where you were talking about the idea that sort of acknowledging that this idea of cross graph work is something that Rome has talked about, and it wouldn't be a stretch to think that Rome will come out with some sort of cross graph capability in the future. But it didn't seem like you were very concerned about that. Elaborate on that thought.
Yeah. Okay. So this extension came from work I've done with Joel Chan. In the Discourse graph extension. It's probably the biggest extension in terms of size and fully fledged features. His main use case is that he wants to be able to like design like a grammar, so to speak, so that he as a Rome user can communicate that grammar with his partner who uses Obsidian, and with his other colleague who uses Logsec, and with this other colleague that uses Athens. And they want to be all like eventually be able to like not care about the client that they use and be able to like communicate all throughout. That's going to obviously use, so the Discourse graph extension today uses multiplayer, and in general I would love to see multiplayer continue to head in this direction. It seems to me that there's all these like tool for thought clones, because everyone thinks that they have the answer to like how to do collective intelligence. Mm-hmm. But the problem with everyone thinking that they have the approach is that you need everyone to you sort of need everyone to decide that your tool is the one that wins, and that's almost never going to happen because we're all humans and we have individual preferences and ticks and like features that we want. So I'm a lot more motivated by this idea of like all these tools being clients to like a broader network. And so building a network that makes it a lot easier for all these tools to communicate with each other and send data across to each other really fascinates me, and is like a direction that I really want multiplayer to go.
Got it. So much of the work that you're doing on this multiplayer extension is going to be creating primitives or building blocks, so to speak, that you'll be able to leverage in this broader mission of almost building a layer on top of these different tools for thought.
Yeah. Like today, like the focus is going to be very much on Rome. Like, can we get
Right.
graph to graph communication like really stable, solve all these networking edge cases that come up, and get that to a point where it's actually useful for people. Once we have that solved, I'm very curious to reach out to other extension developers from other apps, um, to talk about possible collaborations of like how can we port this functionality to their plugin ecosystem so that users across ecosystems can talk to each other, and that way I can then talk to some of the users that I've lost in the in the last year that have like migrated away from Rome into other apps.
Yeah, there's been a fair amount of that for sure. You mentioned Joel Chan, Rome, longtime member of the Rome community. I've had him on actually the very first Rome session quite a while ago. Talk about the Discourse extension for anyone listening who's not familiar with that. What you touched on it briefly there, but elaborate a little bit more on the work that you've done with Joel. Presumably Joel is kind of offering guidance and sort of a guinea pig, so to speak. Talk a little bit more about that experience and what that extension does.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Joel's also been the source of funding. He secured a grant with Protocol Labs, so that the two of us can work on this extension together. And he has like this grand plan of like connecting different apps to each other. It's like all attributed to him, and it's like his own like frustrations that he's run into when working with his colleagues.
So he's helped with both the funding and really the high level vision of what this needs to be.
Yeah, exactly. So what the Discourse graph extension is, it allows you. So Rome has low level primitives, right? It has a block, a page, and then has low level relationships, parent, child, references. That's basically the whole like Rome data structure in a nutshell. There's other concept of it. That's like the TLDR. What the Discourse graph extension allows you to do as a user is define higher level primitives. So you can say, okay, this node is an evidence node if the page title starts with EVD, and this node is a question node if it starts with QUE. And then you can define higher level relationships that say, okay, an evidence informs a question if there's a block that references an evidence node and it's on a page that is a question node. And so you could from these like low level, block, page, and then reference, child, parent primitives, you can build higher level abstractions for your data so that you can make a lot more powerful inferences, synthesis, stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's very cool. It almost sounds like in a way, like a protocol layer for tools for thought, so that you can have different clients like Obsidian and Rome and others that are all communicating through this shared language of, what is a evidence page or block, or what is a question, and how do those things all interrelate. I can see that being really useful and very cool. I'll have to dig in and learn more about that. I've seen it in passing and kind of had a notional awareness of what it was, but a big fan of Joel's sort of ideas and vision for the space. So that sounds really cool.
Yeah. I have to be honest, when he first came to me, I was like, I have no idea what you want to do here, but let's work on this. And now over time, I'm like, holy crap, this could be like big. Like he wants to be able, him send his question and evidence node to a user in Obsidian who has their own definition of what a question and evidence node does, and it translates automatically.
Yeah.
Like that's the utopia vision that we're going for.
Yeah. And he's got some really good stuff. His synthesis framework was really, I'll have to include a link to that in the description, but that would kind of give, if you're listening to this and this is all kind of going over your head, like I would go read his synthesis framework, because that's where you can start to see him start to lay out like this idea of different abstractions, like you said, of like how to think about knowledge and knowledge building and knowledge synthesis in a more, I guess, process oriented or just kind of a more of a framework for that.
Right. Yeah. And allow you to build your own.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Well, we're just about up on our time here, but I want to ask you at least one more question, which is mostly just a curiosity driven question on my side. I have to imagine that this multiplayer cross graph idea was fraught with challenges. Talk a little bit about Talk a little bit about that. Am I correct in that assumption? And what were some of the big, maybe more interesting edge cases or complexities that you had to navigate through to get this thing built?
Yeah, I mean, like you just said, the amount of edge cases that you have to go through in order to get two graphs to connect to each other directly it's crazy. And a lot, like, you have to do tons of iteration in order to like make sure you capture all of them. And I'm not even confident that I caught all of them. That's why, I want to release it, or I released it last week, and I'm like, all right, let's see if like the masses can find the rest. But there's all these like, situations of like, okay, what happens when this graph is online, but the other one went offline? What happens when this one that's connected by asynchronous mode, like how can we hand it off from like talking to Realm.js to now talking to each other, and then hand it back into talking to Realm.js? They're like, what happens when a third graph comes into the mix? How does like the three interplay with each other? So yeah, there's all sorts of, and in fact, even in our little demo, I think there was like a small bug that we ran into before I refreshed and sort of like skipped past it. So yeah, there's just like all different like situations of like the different connectivity states of different graphs that you have to like almost like brute test through to like find them all.
Yeah. You're kind of out on the frontier with this one, I'm sure. And I think it's very exciting to hear that you're pushing it out there, and again, getting user feedback. And we've mentioned this a couple of times, but the idea of building through community and of getting it out there and getting, again, that feedback from the community and more ideas about, we talked about that idea of messages earlier and how right now you've just got a few, but in the future that could really expand to be a lot of different things. And our only limits are kind of our imagination. So in closing, two-part question to you. Number one, what can you tell us about any sort of future plans, maybe on this extension in specifically, but it could also be just generally for Realm.js? What's kind of got you excited today on a go forward basis? And then number two, like if somebody's listening and wants to connect with you directly or learn more about your work there, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So future of multiplayer, there's, it's both about stability at this point, and then after stability, implementing more messages. I want to be, as a user, I personally want to be able to like share pages between two graphs and like have updates, update automatically. I want to be able to do cross graph queries. So like give me all the pages that are tagged with to do, for example, and have that take into account multiple graphs. These are all the different types of messages multiplayer can get into. As for future of Realm.js, there's a couple of extensions that are still to come. One, I want to finish up a developer extension to allow other developers to publish and build Realm.js extensions on their own, and then also like have them be able to get monetized through it if they decide to do so. And there's a Smart Assistant extension in the works. If Realm doesn't release a mobile app by June, July, then maybe there's a Realm.js mobile extension that gets started too. But after those, I want to cut off new extension development and just drill down deeper in all the ones that are currently released. I'm at the point now where I've been able to survive to this point through mostly like freelance engagements or grant funding with, as I mentioned, with Joel. And I want to start shifting the weight, I suppose, of that financing from the freelance engagement to more of the Realm.js extensions themselves, so that the product is self-sustaining and I don't have to do more freelancing going forward. And I think Joel's on the same page that we want to get like multiplayer/discourse graph into a state where like it funds itself and we won't need any additional funding from protocol labs.
Very cool. Very cool. And again, if somebody's listening and wants to connect with you directly or learn more about your work, what would be the best way for them to do that?
So I'm pretty active on Twitter. So that's twitter.com/dvargas92495. My DMs are open, so people can always reach out to me. I have Slack and Discord open on my computer all day, except for when I'm doing a call like this. And so you can reach out to me on Slack or Discord. And I basically like have those three like on alert for messages that come in. So those are probably the best way to connect.
Very cool. All right. Well, before we wrap up here, I did want to just take a quick minute to thank everybody for being here today. If you're looking for other ways to connect with Rome Sessions, a few different ways for you to do that. So I've got those up on the screen. Number one, subscribe.romesessions.com. That'll get you signed up for the email newsletter. So it'll get you session reminders and updates about future sessions as well. On Twitter at Rome Sessions. That's still a fairly new Twitter handle. So definitely, if you haven't given that a follow yet, please go do that. And then Jason at romesessions.com is a good email to shoot me a note at. I definitely love hearing from people who are watching the sessions and have ideas about future topics that you would like to see covered. So David, thank you again for taking the time to come on. This was really fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I should also quickly mention that there's a new @Rome_JS Twitter account.
That's right.
The one without the underscore has been inactive for a year, and it's impossible to get inactive in usernames from Twitter. But the Rome_JS is the new, I guess, call it marketing channel for Rome.js. And so all of the Rome.js updates will be shifting off of my account into that more dedicated account.
Cool. All right. Yeah. And if you're watching this in the future and not on our live stream, I'll be sure to include all those links in the description below. So David, thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You too.
All right. Take care.